runner, and I do mean front runner, like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 points for the GOP presidential nomination, Donald J. Trump. Mr. President, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and thank you, sir, for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, 60 points, but I won't say that. I will never correct you.
You're right. There is a poll that has you up there. That's exactly right. Sir, I want to just start with a little bit of the news of the day. A major victory for you in the Michigan Supreme Court leaves Colorado out there kind of as a lone island. Your reaction to the news today?
Well, it was very expected. I think it seems to be that we're 33-1. And the one is hopefully going to be overturned by the Supreme Court because nobody can understand why they did that. I guess maybe they did it for publicity. Yeah. Maybe they did it for the very liberal, radical left governor. Maybe they did it for some other reason. I don't know. Nobody really understands it. But it just is an embarrassment all over the world when they see this. I think it's very bad for Colorado, very, very bad for Colorado. But we just had the big win in Michigan today. And that was a good one. And we have 33 wins. And this isn't a loss because we'll have to see what happens. This is not a final determination, as you know.
Yeah, the U.S. Supreme Court.
And you know, I think it's important. Yeah, it's important for your audience to understand too, John, that it was 4-3. And this was not like a unanimous decision. This was a very hotly debated subject. But, you know, 33 other courts have agreed that you just can't do what they did. So yeah, that's very good.
A lot of our legal experts tell us the U.S. Supreme Court is going to come down where Michigan and all the other courts did too, sir. I'm pretty sure that's how that will turn out. I want to get to another big development today. Jack Smith says he doesn't want you to be able to introduce evidence in your defense that maybe the January 6th attack was preventable, that police and others had engaged in some security failures, intelligence failures beforehand. Your reaction real quickly to the prosecutor's request today.
No, can you believe this? He's tried to defend Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of D.C., but he's tried to defend Nancy Pelosi, who did not do the job. We offered them, as you know, 10,000 troops or National Guard, whatever they wanted, before the event, because I knew it was going to be a very big event. And it wasn't my event. I went and showed up and made a speech. Right. We offered 10,000 people and more if necessary. And if they used 500 people, if they used 200 people, January 6th wouldn't have been January 6th. So can you imagine? This guy says, we don't want to introduce that. Well, that's a very big part of it. She was responsible for January 6th because she didn't take the security that we offered her. We offered her 10,000 troops. And, you know, you had far fewer people than that. It was a very small group of people relatively compared to the people listening to the speech, which was, by the way, the largest number of people that I've ever spoken before. Nobody ever talks about that, John. They talk about the group that went down and peacefully and patriotically, as I said, as you know. They don't mention that either. You know, that wasn't even brought up in the unselect committee. They didn't even use those words. They didn't say that I said the words peacefully and patriotically. This is a very dishonest group of people. And the deranged prosecutor, Jack Smith, he's a deranged human being, unattractive both inside and out. And you look at this guy, he doesn't want me to say that they turned down, and they turned it down in writing, by the way. And what happened is, as you know, the Unselect Committee deleted and threw out everything. They threw everything out, which would be illegal. If you ever did that in a court, a regular court, as a civilian, could you imagine somebody on the right, a Republican or somebody doing it? As you know, they deleted and threw out everything having to do with the hearings. Because a lot of bad things were said about Nancy Pelosi, a lot of bad things were said about a lot of people that they didn't want to get out to the public. So they threw out everything. They deleted everything. There is no information. There's nothing left. Well, it's like crazy. And the reason he doesn't want to do that is because they illegally destroyed everything. They destroyed all evidence. So he wants to do this because of the fact that they destroyed all evidence. They don't have the evidence anymore. And a lot of that evidence was pinpointing that Nancy Pelosi didn't take the troops. Days in advance, I said it. And I said it loud and clear. And they know I said it because I believe it was the mayor wrote a letter back that she doesn't want the troops.
Yeah, no, it's in writing.
But can you imagine a man saying, we're not allowed to bring the fact up that I offered 10,000 troops for January 6th.
Yeah.
You know, look, he's got a bad record. He's lost a lot of cases, and he loses them because he goes too far. He's a sick puppy.
Well, it's important to note the Capitol Police Chief, the former Chief Steve Sund, said on this show that January 6th was a preventable event had they gotten the intelligence and the resources that he had asked. You offered them. It just didn't happen. It's just an amazing thing. Sir, I want to turn to...
I offered them. It's true.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. It's in writing. No doubt about it. So I want to turn to October 7th. The October 7th attack on Israel exposed the dirty truth inside our own country, the growth of this anti-Semitism, particularly among our young people here in America's borders. Over the last week, we've seen pro-Hamas and pro-Palestinian protesters block Christmas celebrations in New York, taunt Jewish Americans, even have a congresswoman, AOC, compare the Gazans to Jesus. If elected again to the White House, how might you use the power of the purse to end federal funding or tax exemptions for groups that espouse anti-Semitism or threaten the security of the Jewish people?
Well, number one, I would use that power, and I'd use it very strongly and very powerfully. But you have to remember one thing. This would have never happened if I were president. If that election wasn't rigged, this would have never happened, John. In a million years, it wasn't going to happen. Iran was broke. They didn't have any money to give around. I put sanctions on. I put everything on and told countries, China, many countries, India, France, don't buy oil. If you buy oil, 1 barrel of oil, you buy any oil, we're not going to do business with you, and we're going to put tariffs on all of your products that do get through. We're not going to do business. Anything gets through, we put 100% tariff on. I told them, nobody, very few people were buying, and it was very small amounts, and they were down to almost a trickle. They were down to nothing. They were broke. They didn't have money for Hamas. They didn't have money for Hezbollah, and this would have never happened. It also wouldn't have happened because they knew the consequences would have been much different than what you're seeing right now. So last night, a young soldier was killed, U.S., and the two were very, very badly hurt. And nobody even talks about it. It's not even believable. They have 129 attacks or something like that on our troops in the Middle East. 129 over the last few weeks. And we don't even do anything about it. This president is incompetent. He has no clue. And he's probably a Manchurian candidate. He's probably totally compromised. You know, he accepts money from so many countries, so maybe he accepted money from these countries, so he doesn't want to do anything about it because they know more than any accountant is going to be able to find out. But he is a Manchurian candidate, and how can he allow? So we had a soldier killed last night, 2 horrifically wounded, and that's going to be just the beginning of it. It's they don't respect him, and they just are doing whatever they want to do. But now Iran, if you look at it, now Iran has $200 billion that they made on oil, not to mention the $6 billion. As you know, they made $6 billion on the hostage deal, and they also made $10 billion on electricity to Iraq. $10 billion. But that's not even the big number. The big number is what they're making on the oil. Because all of these countries that weren't buying when I was president, they wouldn't have bought. There's no way they would have bought. And they were literally down to being broke. They were broke. They had no money. In fact, there were a lot of big stories around that time, 3-4 years ago, that these groups, these terror groups, were breaking up because there was no money coming out of Iran.
Yeah,
wouldn't have happened.
It's an extraordinary thing to watch. There's a general named Soleimani, I think, that knows you meant business. Certainly learned that the hard way. I want to turn to another organization. When you were president, you forced major changes to NATO. You put it on much better financial footing. You got people to pay their fair share. There's another international body that's gaining much negative attention right now, the United Nations. It has repeatedly espoused anti-Israel rhetoric, and it failed to formally condemn the Hamas attacks. It's almost unbelievable. A lot of people can't believe that. If reelected, are you considering any reforms or funding changes to the United Nations?
So, 2 things. First of all, with NATO, when I went in there were only 8 countries. Yeah. At the time, there were 28 countries. There were only 8 countries that were paid up. Yeah. And Poland was one of them. Poland was great. But, you know, usually the closer you were to Russia, the more likely you were to be paid up. But there were 8 out of the 28 that were paid up, and we were paying a disproportionate share. We were paying, I would say, 80, 90, you could even say almost 100% of everybody else. So they take advantage of us on trade. This is the European countries. Right. You add them up, and they're similar size to the United States. So think of this. They take advantage of us on trade. They're very, very bad to us, very hard on trade. So they take advantage, and yet we defend them for practically like I mean, for what? We defend them for, they should be defending themselves. Now, with Ukraine, while you're on the subject, why is it that we're in for $200 billion and they're in for probably $20 billion? That's probably the number. And it was the same thing when I got there. NATO we were in for massive amounts of money, and they were like Germany, spent very little money. They were spending less than 50%, less than half of what they were supposed to be spending. Other countries, likewise, they weren't paid up. And I said, if you don't pay up, then we're not going to defend you. And once they believed that, which they did after a short period of time, hundreds of billions of dollars came pouring into NATO. It was amazing. It was a beautiful thing to see. And Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, is a good man. I wonder if he feels the same way. But about what I'm going to say, he said, President Trump was amazing. All of these presidents came. They made a speech and they left. He came. He told them you have to pay up, and they all paid. And hundreds of billions of dollars now came in. So, I mean, it's just an amazing, it's a beautiful thing to see. Now, if you take a look, in so many other ways, that's what's happening. Why isn't, John, why aren't these countries going dollar for dollar with us? Right. Obviously, it's got to be more important. They're right there. We're not. We have an ocean separating us. Why is it that they're in for a tiny fraction of what we are in terms of payment to, it's in terms of payment, right, with regard to Ukraine? So we're in for perhaps $200 billion. It could be more. Nobody really even knows the number. And they're in for a tiny fraction of that. Very unfair. I say they have to equalize. And if they don't equalize, the United States cannot keep doing this. The United States owes $36 trillion. They can't keep doing this.
Yeah, no, the debt is extraordinary. Sir, I want to turn to the campaign. You're just a couple of weeks from the first votes being cast in Iowa at the caucuses. You have a commanding lead. The press is bored because you're so far in the lead. They were suggesting you might be considering Nikki Haley as a vice president. I want you to answer that. What are you considering her? And second of all, what do you want the American people to know about her record on the border, on taxes, on spending, and on entitlements?
Well, Nikki, I know very well, and I actually got along with her very well, and she wasn't going to run. She said I was a great president, and she would not run as long as I ran, and, that's famous. That's documented with her statements. It's on about 15 tapes and, broadcast all over the place. And then one day she decided to run. So, I thought that was somewhat disloyal. Not nearly as disloyal as Ron DeSanctimonious, who I got elected. And then he, ran. So that was, and he's crashed and burned. And, she's way behind. She's like 50, 60 points behind me. But if she goes up 1 point, they say she surges. In the last poll, I went up 7 points to almost 70, which is hard because I have very little points to go up. They've been used, right? They've been taken already. But I went up 7 points. She went up 3 points, and he went down a couple of points. But because she went up 3 points and he went down, they said she surged, that Nikki Haley surged. But she didn't surge against me. She surged against Ron. But the point is that, look, I know her very well. I actually got along with her very well. As you know, she left at a nice ceremony at the White House, the Oval Office. It was very nice. She said terrific things about me. She said he's a great president. And then she decided out of nowhere to run. So I was a little bit surprised at that, but that's a politician. No, I'm not considering anybody at this time, Jen. Look, I want to win. And one thing I will say, and I've watched this for a long time, the vice president has virtually no impact. You could go back all throughout history. Whoever the choice of vice president is has virtually no impact as to who is going to get a nomination or get elected. It's an amazing thing, actually. Surprising.
Yeah. So for you, the most important thing is someone that could take the reins and do it, but it doesn't really affect the electoral outcome for you in your mind, right?
The most important thing is who would do a good job, because it has to be. But just, it's very interesting when you study it. People are picked and everyone's talking about who's the vice president. But in terms of election, in terms of nomination, the vice presidential pick has very, very little influence over the vote. Amazingly, surprisingly, actually.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. When you look at the electoral thing, there's no doubt about it. Sir, I want to go back to Israel for just a second. You achieved the Abraham Accords, which are one of the greatest achievements in the Middle East history. You then put together a peace plan for Israel and Palestine that people, even today, 3 years later, still refer to regularly. At some point, Hamas is going to be eradicated from Gaza. What is your best ideas for trying to get peace and prosperity inside Palestine, particularly because so many Palestinians have been conditioned for decades to hate Israel? What are the keys to prosperity in Gaza that you're thinking about right now?
Well, they do hate Israel, and Israel hates them. And if you look at even when they're growing up, and the Palestinians are growing up, and their children are being educated, they read books like the old days with Run, Spot, Run. Yeah. They have hatred in these books, hatred of Jewish people. It's a terrible thing, and frankly, it's makes it very hard. I always felt I could get a deal. I think I would have had a deal. This would have never happened. October 7th would have never happened. It could not have happened. I think I could have had a deal. Now it's much harder to have a deal, actually, and it's a deal that the hatred has only gotten worse. By allowing this to happen, and Biden allowed it to happen. Look, Biden is trying to play both sides, and he's failing, I think, unless people are stupid. He's failing because what he did is took all the sanctions off Iran, and Iran's gained hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth. Yeah. And you don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and they're 30 days from getting one. They say 31, 32 days away from having nuclear capability. You don't want, when I terminated the nuclear deal, that was a great thing. The problem was the administration did nothing with the termination. Right. I would have had a deal with Iran within 2 weeks after the election, had the election been different, had the outcome been different. I would have had a deal with Iran within 2 weeks after that election. We would have had a deal because Iran they were needing a deal. They had no money. They couldn't fund themselves, let alone terror. We would have had a deal. But now they're rich again. They're really rich again, and they're selling oil to China as their number one customer, millions and millions of barrels of oil. And they were selling almost nothing with me. And Iran was allowed to get rich because Joe Biden allowed them to. So he can say whatever he wants, but he's the reason for this. He's an incompetent president. He's a compromised president, totally compromised. But he allowed them to get rich. Now they're rich, and it's a very hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to have. But worse than being rich, because of the money, because of what they have, they will have within a short period of time nuclear weapons. And that is never something that can be allowed to happen.
And you were fighting to make sure it would never happen. Sir, last question, because I know you're on a tight time schedule. Joe Biden paints any American who calls himself a patriot or wants to join you in making America great again as extremists. But I've noticed something recently on your events. So you're zeroing in on Democrats' extreme positions when it comes to things like abortion up to birth, freeing violent offenders from prison, keeping the border insecure, and allowing biological men in women's locker rooms. If you win the nomination, do you plan to flip the script and make extremism a Democrat liability?
It is a liability. They are extreme. Look, what's more extreme? I just looked at pictures, and I've just looked at a report. Millions of people, not thousands, millions of people are pouring into our country, numbers that are much bigger than being reported by the fake news. And you see it. I mean, when you look at those groups of people, they were saying 4,000 or 5,000 people coming up. But if you look, it looks bigger than a Trump rally of 30,000 people. I've never seen it. They are pouring up from all over the world. It's not just El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, etc. They're pouring up from all over the world. They're coming from Africa. They're coming from the Congo. Right. The Congo is sending a lot of people. They're coming from Asia. They're coming from all over the world. A lot of people coming, interestingly, from China, and they're all young, and they're all male. They're between 20 and 25 years old. It sounds like an army to me. Yeah. But a lot of people from China, a lot of people from Russia, but a lot of people from Africa and just Asia generally. They're pouring in. They're destroying the country. They're destroying our country. There is absolutely no control. There's no check. Many of these people are sick. Many of them come from prisons. They're very sick. Many of them are very sick. It's a horrible thing because I have a bigger heart than anybody. But Americans are going to get sick. These are diseases that are easily catchable by people, and it's a terrible thing. But they're also coming from prisons and jails. They're being emptied out. Mental institutions. I always say mental institutions, and a step above that are the insane asylums where you have some very sick people. They're being emptied out into our country, and as you know, many terrorists are coming into our country. These people are either evil that are running our country. There's something wrong with them. This is not like, oh, gee, look, a lot of times I'll be conservative, or I call myself more common sense than anything else, but I'll be common sense and they want to do so. But I can understand why, I can understand the other side. There is no understanding why millions of people from jails, from everywhere, from parts unknown, actually, from countries, people never even heard of some of these countries. There is no understanding why millions and millions of people are allowed to freely walk into our country. And the crime is the crime that they're causing and the problems they're causing. Nobody's telling you about their stays in hotels.
Right.
They're taking over hotels, top hotels, being paid for by the United States while our vets are sleeping on streets. But they're taking over top hotels. The fights that are taking place in the hotels, the destruction, the beating up of the employees, nobody wants to tell you about that. Yeah. These are rough people that are going into those hotels. The Biden administration, I believe he's the worst. I don't believe. There's not even a question about it. He's the worst president in the history of our country. And by the way, he's weaponized justice. I've got 4 indictments that are bullshit indictments. He's weaponized justice. This was never supposed to happen in our country. And what he's done in terms of using the DOJ and the FBI to attack his political opponent, nobody has ever seen a thing like this happen other than in a banana republic.
Well, sir, I'm certain of one thing. The American people remember a time when the border was secure, when Iran was behaving and drained of its finances. It's a time that they're not going to soon forget. It's a great honor to have you on. I want to wish you and the First Lady a happy New Year early, and thank you for joining us, sir. What a great honor.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you,
sir. God bless.